What's up guys, and welcome to part 3 of tutorial series on Amazon API Gateway tutorial. In the previous tutorial we have created the resources, post method, and finally associated the lambda function with the post method that we have created. So now in this tutorial I will take you through on how to deploy the API endpoint and start invoking it. Right, so in the previous tutorial, we ended up with a question that where can we get the API endpoint URL, right? So, well, the answer is in this tutorial. So let's get started. So as you can see on my screen, I have created this API endpoint in the part 1 tutorial of this tutorial series, right? So that is API endpoint. So let's go ahead and open this. Right, so here we have resources. So as you can see, there is post-json and the post method. So that is something that we have created in the previous tutorial, right? And then within the post method, within integration request, we had bind API gateway tutorial lambda function with this method, right? So this is something that we had covered in the previous tutorial. So moving along, now we want to deploy this API endpoint. So we will not get the API endpoint URL until and unless we deploy this API, right? Though you can test this API using this test button, right? And you can send the headers and request body and say test, right? And it will return the response on the right panel. So this is how you can test the API from the console itself. So now we can deploy this API by clicking on actions and click on deploy API, right? Now it's asking for a deployment stage and deployment description. So if I click here, then I have not created any deployment stage yet, right? So it has an option saying new stage, and I can create it on the fly. Or what you can do is you can create the stage first and then deploy the API. So for creating the stage, you need to click on stages in the left panel and say create stage. So it's sort of same screen that appeared while we were trying to deploy the API from the resources, right? So this is how you can create the stage and then deploy, or you can also create the deployment stage on the fly, right? So if you remember, then in the previous tutorial I have shown you this URL, that is www.thetechnologyupdates.com/v1/postjson, right? So in the previous tutorial we have created this resources, so /post-json is our resource, right? And now version 1 is going to be our deployment stage, right? So in case instead of version 1 I want to say dev, then I will create a stage called dev and then I will deploy that API, right? So for now, let's keep it version 1. So let's see how we can get there. So navigate back to API gateway. So I will create a stage on the fly. So I will go to resources, I will click on actions and say deploy API. Now here I will select new stage and I will name it as version 1. Stage description goes version 1 probably, and I will leave deployment description blank and I will say deploy. Now as you can see, it has navigated to stages, and here you can see one stage has been created saying version 1, right? And here is our invoke URL API, right? So this is the URL that we can use to hit or invoke the endpoint, right? So now here we have a number of options saying settings. You can enable cache, throttling, web application firewall, and whatnot, right? Then we have logs, stage variables, SDK generation. So this is for ideally for a mobile platform, right? As you can see, Android, JavaScript, iOS, Java SDK, Ruby. Ruby could be a web, right? Then we have export. So you can export this as Swagger or as OpenAPI 3, right? So if you click on JSON, it will download a Swagger specification for this API endpoint. Then we have deployment histories. So as you can see, we have just deployed this API, then documentation history, then we have canary endpoint, right? So you can split the traffic like 80-20 or 30-70 in terms of testing the new deployment, for example, right? So that's canary. So maybe I will cover canary in a separate tutorial, but we will see, right? So now the API has been deployed, right? So now how we can invoke this? So we are going to copy this URL. So I will say copy. I will open Postman and I will paste the URL here. And we have the post method, not get. So select post. And after version 1, we have to mention the resource, that which resource we want to invoke. So in our case, it's post-json, right? So I will say post-json, right? And now I will pass headers, maybe content type as application JSON, right? And within the body, I will say raw, and I will simply define a dummy JSON. Test API invoke, right? And I will click on send. Now it should return response 200, right? So as you can see, it returns status code 200, and this is the actual HTTP code over here, right? So that is 200, and it returns saying that hello from Lambda, right? So we can modify this response. So for that, let's navigate to Lambda function that is associated with this API. So Lambda, and we will open that Lambda function, that is API gateway tutorial, right? Now here we can modify the response. So it says hello from Lambda. We can say API invoked, right? And we can also print the event here to check the payload that we are sending from Postman. So save this function. And now we will reinvoke this API endpoint. So I will say send again. So now it returns status code 200 and saying body that API invoked, right? And we can look at the payload, that is the JSON within CloudWatch log. So here we are within the CloudWatch management console. So here it is, right? And as you can see, we have the payload here, that is test API invoke, that we are passing from the Postman from here, right? So this is how you can deploy the API, and you can test this API using Postman, right? So what if I change this content type to application/JSON to JavaScript? It worked, right? So there is no validation check that what type of content the API should accept, right? So as you can see, it accepts any JSON body, or if we change the content type header from application JSON to application JavaScript, it accepts everything, right? So how we can validate that it should only accept content type header as, for example, application/JSON, right? So that is something I will cover in the next tutorial, right? That how we can validate the content type header and make sure that whoever or the client who is invoking this API pass on the correct content type or correct header, right? So well, that's it for now. So please guys, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and as usual, If you want me to do tutorial on any use case or service, then please leave them below and I will try my best to come up with a tutorial as soon as possible. And if you have any queries or comments, then again please leave them below and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and see you next time.